Welcome to the Question Table. The Question Table is a podcast of the Way Home Ministries, and I am your host, Sylvia Geronimo. Over the past months on this podcast, we've been slowly making our way through the year, asking questions, sitting with them, and patiently allowing the answers to unfold. Now, much of what we talk about here grows out of a journey that I have been on for the past 10 years. The quiet, ongoing work of tending to my soul before God. In this episode, which is actually a two-part this week and next week, I want to pause and spend some time unpacking what we mean when we talk about soul care. And what's the big deal about it? What does it matter? I've always asked good questions, and I've invited others to allow space to sit with these questions honestly and patiently. And this will be a longer episode, so I invite you to stay with me, to bear with me. I hope it helps bring some clarity to what soul care is and how it continues to invite us into his journey. So let's dig deep into what is the big deal and what are we actually talking about. I want to start by sharing with you kind of the rhythm that I've entered into in the past few years and especially now. And that is that I travel overseas at least twice a year. I cross oceans, I move through time zones, and sometimes I step from one season into another, all in a single trip, it seems. And I will be honest with you, I am not a practical packer. I am definitely not a minimalist. Maybe you can identify with me because when I pack, I bring what I know I'll need, what I think I might need, what I could possibly need, and what I don't need. And then there are the books I never read, the journals I hardly touch, and the makeup I end up forgoing altogether. I pack, unpack, repack, overpack, and stack pack. And then, after all that effort, I end up wearing about 3 outfits consistently. So traveling and packing is not for the faint of heart. But here is what always happens, is that by the time the trip is over and it's time to head back home, my suitcase looks nothing like it did when I first left. My clothes are a mess. Some are even dirty because I just do not have time to do laundry. But some have stains that they can't be removed and they just need to be tossed. And I realize that some things are now out of fashion. I don't even want them anymore. Along the way, I've purchased a few little treasures that I'm excited to bring back and enjoy. So before I head home, my mindset shifts because now it's not about just traveling or just making it through the trip. It's about going home. And when my face is turned towards home, I don't want to drag an overstuffed suitcase. I want to travel light. And that means purging. It means cleaning out. It means simplifying, because if I don't, the cost of carrying all that extra weight is going to catch up with me, and I'll pay for it in ways that hurt. I think, and I've noticed, even in my own life and in those that I have been accompanying for all these years, that the same thing happens in our spiritual lives. Over time, our souls accumulate stuff. Now, some of it is just the wear and tear of life. Those disappointments, the stresses, the worries, pain and loss, anxieties, fears, all those things. But some things are stained with sin or shame, and they simply need to be surrendered to Jesus. Other things are simply outdated. Our old mindsets, our old habits, our ways of living that no longer fit who we are in Christ. And God has placed new treasures in us that He wants to bring forward, but there's no room to showcase them because our suitcase is crammed full. Over time, our souls become like overstuffed suitcases. And then we cry out, "Oh Lord, I need your peace. I want you to restore my joy or fill me with your love." But it's almost like God whispers back, "Daughter, you are already full. There's no room for more until you unpack what doesn't belong and what you no longer need." I think this is what the Apostle Paul tells us in Ephesians 4, that we are to take off the old before we put on the new. And I think this is why Jesus invites us to lay our burdens down and find rest for our souls. This is what he was saying when he was talking about new and old wineskins. So, soul care is really about unpacking with God, allowing him to sort through what's dirty, what's worn out, what's worth keeping, and what needs to go, so that we can make room for his presence and his peace and his joy and his love. So, it's about making space for God. I think that if we don't stop to unpack, the weight only builds and life starts to feel exhausting. It's like dragging a suitcase that's too heavy to carry. But when we let God into that space, when we unpack with him, I think something shifts. I've noticed that the bag gets lighter. Our souls can breathe easier. And suddenly there's room. There's room for his peace and his freedom and his joy and all the things that we want and need. And we step into the next season not weighed down by the old, but ready for what is new, for what he has prepared. So here's a set of questions for you, because that's what we do. We ask questions. Take a moment right now and picture the suitcase of your soul. What's in there that is worn out and needs to be tossed? What feels too heavy and needs to be laid down? And what new treasure has God given you that he wants to bring forward into this new season? So in summary, just like a suitcase after a long trip, our soul collects things along the way. Some are useful, some are worn out, some we were never meant to carry, and some we were never meant to bring home. And before we can receive what's new, we often need to unpack what's old. So soul care initially is the intentional practice of opening our inner lives before God, releasing what weighs us down, and making space for his renewing, transforming presence. Let me share a story of my personal experience. In 2019, to celebrate our 30th wedding anniversary, my husband and I decided to take a trip of a lifetime, and we decided to walk the Camino de Santiago. We chose to be pilgrims. We were two pilgrims with nothing but backpacks on our shoulders, walking for 2 weeks across 2 countries, 2 time zones, and 2 languages. And it was grueling, and it was transformational. To be a pilgrim is a high calling. I learned that it takes both patience and endurance. Along the way, I quickly learned what was essential and what was superfluous. Life got reduced to the basics. It was my next step and my next stop, the next path, the next corner, the next drink of water, the next good meal, and the next place to lay my head. And in that reduction, something beautiful happened. I started to feel joy I never knew I needed. I released burdens I didn't even know I was carrying. I faced challenges I never thought or imagined that I could ever overcome. But I also discovered beauty in the simplest things, because beauty was all around me. And most importantly, I came to know who I was in God and where I was headed. And that's what soul care is too. It's to be a pilgrim headed home to the heart of God. It's the journey of the soul. And like every true pilgrimage, like every true journey, it unfolds in stages. The journey of the soul has 3 phases. It's facing our past, practicing the sacredness of the present moment, and surrendering the future into God's hands. So soul care is tending to the inner pilgrimage, making space for God to heal what's broken and restore what's weary, redeem what's lost, and anchor us in the love that is his anchor us in the beauty that is God. So I want to unpack that with you today in this episode by starting with the first phase, which is soul care and how we deal with our past. The first step in the journey is learning this. How do I deal with my past? Because the truth is that every one of us carries baggage from where we have been. And some of us even carry shrapnel. Those wounds, our regrets, our dysfunctional family patterns, the habits that we picked up along the way, our disappointments, our coping strategies. See, the past is never behind us. The past is always present to us until we deal with it. It shows up in the way we think, in the way that we react, in the way that we are triggered, in the way that we see ourselves and others, and even in the way that we see God. And here's the problem, is that those unprocessed places in our past, they can and will sabotage us because they whisper lies about who we are and about our worth. They keep us from being grounded in our true identity as the beloved of God. They carry emotional weight. We may not even notice at first, but over time they keep us stuck and unable to live in the freedom we long for. We want to fly, but the baggage of yesterday ties us down. We want to move, but the baggage of yesterday drags us. I remember one time rushing to the airport late for a flight. My suitcase was so stuffed I could hardly zip it shut. And then when I got to the airport, I was asked to put my bag on a scale that I had not anticipated. The airline agent told me I was way over the weight limit. She looked at me and said politely, "Ma'am, you'll have to take some things out, or you are going to pay for that." And isn't that the way that life feels sometimes? We try to shove everything from our past into our soul's carry-on, our unresolved issues, our broken relationships, guilt and shame and disappointments, but it ends up costing us dearly. If we don't unpack, the weight becomes too heavy, and we pay for it in our peace, our joy, our clarity, our confidence, even in the closeness of our relationships, especially in our intimacy with Jesus. But there are two pathways of unpacking our past, two ways that open up the door to soul care, and that is the spiritual practice of forgiveness and lament. Forgiveness is about releasing others and ourselves from the debt of our past, a debt that they cannot pay, that they could never pay. I remember reading an author once who said that our faith, our Christian walk, is all about one word: forgiveness. It is about asking forgiveness, receiving forgiveness, and extending forgiveness. Forgiveness doesn't mean that what happened was okay. It doesn't excuse the wrong, but it means that we choose to place the offense in God's hands so that it no longer holds power over us. Because without forgiveness, we carry bitterness and resentment like heavy stones in our suitcase, and it will drain us of our joy and our hope. It will actually drain us of life itself. So the spiritual practice of forgiveness. Then the spiritual practice of lament. Lament is about bringing our pain honestly before God. Many of us, especially those of us in the church has never taught us how to grieve our losses with God, but we have a whole book or more about lament. The book of Psalms is about lament. Instead, we are told that time will heal all, but time heals nothing. We just push things down and hope that they will fade. But lament is the sacred practice of saying to God, "God, this hurt. This wasn't how it was supposed to be." And when we lament, we invite Him into our wounds and give space for His comfort to meet us there. Without lament, we carry unhealed sorrow that quietly weighs us down. It kills what is supposed to bloom and stunts what is supposed to grow. In the same way that we experience micro tears, when we experience pain, and all of us do experience pain and loss, it becomes a rupture, like a micro tear, that if it is not repaired by forgiveness or lament, becomes a chasm. Soul care begins when we dare to forgive, when we allow ourselves to lament. These practices don't erase the past, but they keep the past from controlling the present. So let's stop here, put our suitcase down, and unpack some things with God. I want to give you a moment to reflect quietly with God, to close your eyes if you're comfortable, to picture your soul as a suitcase sitting in front of you, and now ask the Lord, what is one heavy item I've been carrying from my past? Is this something that calls for forgiveness, either for someone else or even for myself? Or is this something that calls for lament, a grief that I need to bring honestly to God and to cry about it, for what could have been and should have been and wasn't? Can you imagine yourself taking that item out of your suitcase and placing it in God's hands and see Him receiving it with love? And hear Him say, this does not define you. You can let it go. I will carry it. Because you belong to me. You are now free. This is enough to take a deep breath and to notice that your suitcase feels lighter. This might be the beginning of your soul care. Let's move to the next phase, and that is soul care and the sacredness of the present moment. One of the greatest barriers to soul care is our tendency to live anywhere but here. For many of us, life is always about the next thing. When we reach that final milestone, when we can solve this present moment, when we can achieve that goal, when the kids grow up, or when I can retire, or after this Bible study, or in the next season, at the end of the week, at the beginning of the next month, it's always about the next thing. And then when that next thing arrives, then we can finally rest. Then we can go back to pay attention. Then we can finally notice and invest. Then we can finally be at peace. But Jesus reminds us that life is not always out there somewhere in the future. Life is here, and life is now. In John 10:10, in the Message, he says this, I came so that they can have real and eternal life, more and better life that they ever dreamt of, so that they can have. He doesn't say someday they will have. He says that they can have. And he's talking about now. The kingdom is not only in the future, it is present in the here and now. We have a skewed view, because life is not a treasure hunt that we have to figure out the clues so that we can reach where X marks the spot, and that is life. And life is not an emergency, an ambulance drive of fixing what is broken and healing what is in pain, or healing the wounds only. It's not something to be fixed, and it's not a production to perform where when I can say my words and do my part, I can step off the stage and then I can live life. Life is simply life, and it can only be lived one moment at a time. And here's the sacred truth, is that when we live in the now, that is where we encounter God, and only there. God does not meet us in the imaginary future we long for, and nor in the shadowy past we replay. He meets us here, in the ordinary, unrepeatable moment we're living in right now. And that's why the present moment is holy ground. You know, I think of Moses, the story of Moses. Here's Moses going about his daily life, and then he comes across a burning bush, and there's a voice, and the voice calls out his name and says, take off your sandals, for the place you are standing in is holy ground. You can read that story for yourself in Exodus 3:5. You see, holy ground wasn't back in the past in Egypt, and it wasn't in the future in the promised land. It also wasn't up the mountain, and it wasn't in the wilderness. Holy ground was not somewhere out there, it was right under his feet. Soul care is about learning to live here. There's an author that I love, Suman Kidd. She wrote a book called When the Heart Waits. And in this book, she reminds us that life is less about living along a long line where we are rushing along our lives, but It's more like living in a single dot, deep in the dot, where we are attentive to God's presence in the moment. We are alert to His voice. We are awake to His invitation. And this is what the practices of the presence of God are all about. They are those practices that allow us to slow down enough to notice, to attend to receive so that we can respond and not react to life. Practicing the presence of God is nothing more than being present to God. And God is not only out there and He's not just only in here. He is simply, profoundly, magnificently, powerfully, entirely here. But you have to slow down enough to be able to see Him, to allow His gaze to fall upon you, where you can sense His presence in the room, where you can physically sense Him holding you and you can allow Him to hold you and hold on to Him. Where you can hear His whisper and you can respond to Him, where you can just be with Him. This is the practice of silence and solitude. It's about being in reality. It's about staying in your body, because I find myself living a lot in my head. And when I live in my head, I either live in the past or I live in the future, but I don't live in the moment. Embodied faith is not just an illusion. It's about encounter. And every true encounter with the living God transforms us. But when our heads are lost in tomorrow's clouds or yesterday's ether, we miss what is right in front of us. And what is right in front of us is life. Sacred, ordinary, mundane, abundant life. It is God life. So what kind of person are you? Where do you find yourself most often? Pulled into the past, reaching into the future, or grounded in the present? And what helps you slow down enough to notice God in the moment you're living in right now? What might it look like for you to live deep in the dot this week? And how do you hear Jesus' words differently when He says, I came so that they can have life, more and better life than they ever dreamt of, and He means that for you now? So let's look now at the final phase, and that is soul care and relinquishing the future. Relinquishing the future is at the very heart of soul care, because to relinquish means to surrender, to trust, to accept, to abandon, and to entrust. These are all spiritual practices. The journey of the soul means that we need to confess how often we depend on ourselves to secure our safety, our success, and our happiness. When we talk about surrender and acceptance and trust, what we are really saying is that, and acknowledging really, is that I might have preferences, and I do. That's being honest. I have preferences of how I would like my life to unfold. But I have to confess that God gets to choose. When I try to secure my own safety, my own success, and my own happiness, it leaves me grasping, controlling, and endlessly striving. But soul care requires me to open up my hands, to release control, and to trust that God will provide what I need when I need it, and then to entrust what He has provided back to Him. Jesus reminds us in Matthew 6:34, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. When we try to live in the future, all we will find is anxiety, because our soul does not find God there, because God is here now. All we will find is scarcity and illusion. And because of that, we hoard today's gifts as if they won't be enough for tomorrow. We believe that it's all up to us to make life work. And that's not faith, that's playing God. And when we play God, we wear ourselves out. I want you to think about this. I want you to think about the difference between expectancy and expectation. Expectancy is living open to whatever God chooses to do. It's a posture of trust, a willingness to wait and then to receive. Expectation, on the other hand, is when I decide what the outcome should be and then I try to control its realization. Expectancy lets God be God. Expectation makes me God. Relinquishing the future is stepping back into reality, into the present moment where God actually is. And it's admitting that the future isn't guaranteed, but God's presence is. Because sometimes God hides so that our trust issues can come out of hiding and be exposed. It's choosing to trust His strength and His goodness instead of clinging to my illusion of control. Soul care is not about controlling outcomes. It's about surrendering to God's love and living in His abundance right here, right now. So where are you holding on to control? Control of the future instead of relinquishing it to God? In your own life, have you confused expectation, which is control, with expectancy, which is trust? And what does it look like for you to travel light in this season? Trusting God with tomorrow so you can live with Him fully here today. What would change in your soul if you truly believed that God is both strong and loving, good and kind, and He will provide? When we entrust our tomorrow into God's hands, we open up ourselves to receive today as a gift. The gift of love, the gift of presence, and that is soul care. Friends, we have looked at the phases of soul care. It's about traveling light. It's about dealing with our past in a way that opens up the doorways of forgiveness and lament, because things have happened to us. But they don't need to continue to control our present joy or our present peace or our freedom to walk into the future with God. Soul care is also about being present, because that's where we encounter God. And isn't that the point? Is to be with God, to know that He's here, and that we are here, and that we are not alone. But it's also about relinquishing the future, because all we have is this moment. So what's the big deal? The big deal is that life is before us. And life is to be lived, all of it. We don't want anything to get in the way. We don't want anything to weigh us down. We don't want anything to drag. Soul care matters because you matter. And so I invite you to go back to those questions, to give yourself time, because that matters too, and see what bubbles up, what answers rise, because these questions are important. But this is just part one. Next week, we will look at part two, and we will look at what does it mean? What is the difference between soul care and self-care and soul care and discipleship? I hope you will join me. Again, at the question table, there's always a seat open for you. So until next week, travel light.